Hello, my name's Nick Harris. I'm a UK-based illustrator working mostly in children's book illustration. I'm a converted watercolourist and I've been working digitally for the last 10 years, working in total for about 30 years. So I'm very tired now. Obviously not non-stop, I do have breaks. This is the Art Rage interface, version 4 in case you don't know it. I have lots of layers. That's how I build it. I think like a watercolourist, I build things up in layers, building depth and tone and lighting. The composition is based on confrontation between a bad guy and some knights. This is to do with showing torn metal. The obvious way to do it for me was to show some knights and then some who've been a little bit dismembered. I just turned off the texture layer that provides a lot of the atmosphere to this. That's set to multiply on a layer lower down. It's a very quick way of providing atmosphere without too much detail. I apply lighting in a similar way. If we scroll up here, that layer there is based on the complementary colours yellow and purple and is laid over the top to provide a lighting for the scene. See, when it's turned off, it's quite a lot less atmospheric. That was done with the chalk, and you can set paper textures in Art Rage. So if you close in, that provides more atmosphere. And then individually the characters have their own shadow layers. That's me. I just turned the layer off that's got which is over a solid base layer on this character at the front here. And then when you combine it with the yellow and purple up the top, it provides a lot of depth and subtlety, like that. Anyway, that's the basics of how I work. The same was done with that character over there where the cursor is now having a bit of a wibble. These two characters are obviously not resolved yet. And there's two characters at the bottom which you may have noticed earlier in some of the JPEGs I flashed up to show how we got to this point. They are splatted on the floor. I'll just turn them on if I can find the right layers. I haven't labelled my layers. That's very naughty, because at this point I've still got a pretty fair idea where they are. I would encourage to label them whenever possible. The figures on the floor consist of a solid layer, which is very faint at the moment, and a drawn layer over the top, which will be set to multiply. Which I don't know why I'm waving the cursor there. This is doing voice narration after the fact. No, I thought I would be onto there we go. Ha! It's no good hiding. See, it's very in a light colour there, and then the drawing over the top. The two knights have been splatted by this bad guy at the front who has discovered the joys of a tin opener. Yeah, I've got a silly sense of humour. And I've been encouraged by Imagine Effects to make it gory, so there'll be blood involved. So those of a squeamish disposition, don't be eating anything to upset your stomachs at this point, to go along with that. And we will be working on those. This is what the point of this particular vidcap is about, doing distressed, torn and mangled metal. Now suddenly, through the magic of Camtasia, I'll be working 5 times faster because I've speeded up the clip speed so we can get more in. That was me checking the layers to make sure I was working on the right layer, and then actually naming the drawing layer so I can find it easier. Because as you can see, I have the layer palette at a reduced size, so it's quite hard to spot things on it. It's me just trying to work on the drawing a bit. They're a bit big, the figures on the ground at the moment, but I'll work on them at this scale, and then I will group them and group the layers, that is, and reduce the size of it, because at the moment they're far too big relating to the character just behind. One on his back, one on his front. The one on his front may well be headless. Blocking in with a few more colours just to make it a bit more interesting. I've picked up a colour off the armour at the back and I'm using to start with. I want it to be a bit more blue than that. I don't know what that looks like. It doesn't look like armour. A bit of pink for some flesh colour, which may be showing through. Having trouble saying that. It's not even a tongue twister. Blocking some darker colour. That might be a bit too dark. We'll see. It's all a matter of making adjustments. That's too blue and pops too much. I just picked out a colour and did it. There are some colours on there's a toolbox there next to the layer palette, which is something else you can set it up in ArtRage, a floating toolbox, which you can pin samples to of certain colours, and I have some base colours there, and I saved a few colours from the composition as we go, like the purple from the lighting layer that we talked about earlier, so that I can match it if I need to. Now I'm going to go through the rigmarole of sampling it again, and this is me grouping the figures as I said I would, and just moving them, adjusting their position slightly to make them read a little better in the composition. Now they're no way right, there's a lot of work still to do on them. They're not, the one particular lying face down isn't even in correct perspective. He's lying at an angle that just doesn't work. Although on a uneven ground you could probably get away with that. I will adjust it slightly there. He was an afterthought. The guy on his back was going to be the only one at one point, but then I thought several corpses would be better to show the effectiveness of the tin opener. Working on the drawing, trying to just clarify some of the shapes. The arm on the back of the guy lying face down is very unconventional, doesn't work. I'm going to have to do something about that. And his arm seems a bit short, or seemed a bit short. I've made it a little bit longer. Still looks a tad short, although it is slightly bent. So some metal will be twisted, as in the sword. Some will be torn. The thing about metal, under pressure, it behaves very oddly. In some ways, it's almost like if you've got sheet metal, it can tear like paper. You just get very jagged edges. Not very pleasant thought. But think about car crashes. What happens to metal in car crashes? How it distorts and gets totally misshapen and just crumples. Can be ripped. I know we don't tend to be able to do that with our bare hands, but with the right force, supposed to be indicated here by the beast with the tin opener, then it could be torn asunder. Actually helping to define the shade and the form a bit, I'm splattering some blood on it. I already had a blood layer. That sounds very unpleasant, a layer of blood, but it was on the like on the spikes along the back of the beast, that kind of thing. I'd already added blood to indicate that he's been involved in quite a few scrapes, for want of a better word, already, delivering injury and death to various numbers. If I keep the shade dark enough in the foreground, then I won't have to go into too much detail, because I'd rather not be doing details of intestines and that kind of thing. And in fact, stuff that's hinted at would be much more horrible than if I just describe it fully, as is often the case in suspense films. Now I'm zooming in a bit so that we can work more closely on the bodies on the ground. I zoomed in by holding down Shift and Spacebar and dragging, and then moved by holding Spacebar. That's obviously appears in a lot of software, that particular shortcut. I'm trying to adjust the position of the face down figure to conform more to the ground plane. The far leg I've moved up a bit to try and make him lie flatter, so you see more of him. He was twisted away from you too much before. This is just using the pencil tool on the drawing layer for this particular group. In terms of armour, I don't really go for the big ornate and the elaborate suits of armour, because I don't feel they're necessarily practical. These are fighting men rather than people that just like to pose in nice suits of armour. Neither do I go for enormous swords of unfeasible size that only people with superhuman strength could lift. These are just ordinary guys. Sorry, they just were ordinary guys. Now they're just dismembered ordinary guys. Sword in the background is going to be used as the twisted metal, to show some twisted metal. nicely bent out of shape. Didn't bother to use the tin opener for that, just had a bit of a mangle with his hands on that one. The beastie, I mean. That's the theory behind it. The idea is to try and show torn metal, as I said, and mangled metal. Maybe a bit of panel beating going on as well. Back to car references again. There'll be a lot of fettling and generally fiddling around with the drawing, getting it wrong, and getting it wrong, and getting it wrong, and then getting it a little less wrong, and then I give up. That's kind of how I work. Lots of rubbing out. Just dragging around to see how it relates to the rest of the drawing. Bit of rubbing out. You can change the size of the brush in Art Rage by the keyboard shortcut Shift and dragging. That applies to the eraser on the reverse tip as well. That's a handy one to have if you're using a keyboard and desktop, as I am. In case you're interested, I've got a Wacom Pro medium size Intuos that I've bought recently that I'm using. Gradually getting used to it. I had an Intuos 3 for years. Well, strictly speaking, I had 3 Intuos 3s till I broke them all. They do get a lot of use. Doing stuff in slightly slow motion and just to show you how to get to the multiply settings on a layer. You might want to rewind and look at that again if you're interested. There's a little icon at the bottom of each layer with a drop down menu. You go to blend mode and a whole list appears, and I set it to multiply. That is because I added a layer of shade in to try and add more depth. That is between the drawing layer and the body color layer. So now there are 4 layers to this thing. Is it 4? Can I count? Yeah, if you count the blood, that is. Got the body color, the shadow layer, the drawing, and up the top you've got the blood. The blood is layer that's much higher up because I'm using it in various places, as on the beastie, whose layers appear higher up in the stack. It's just however you want to organise your layers. This is how I think. In the same way as the lighting layer is higher up and influencing all the characters underneath. And then I will paint highlights on top of that, little accents and things, but you're not allowed to do too many of those too early because they're the fun bit. They're what bring a picture to life. Until you've got all the tones in, it's hard to judge when you're going to need them. I'm waffling away while really I just work away at these figures at the bottom without anything much in particular to say about it. I'm working on the various different bits, just trying to have the different bodies work better, just in terms of volume and in terms of the armour they're wearing, that kind of thing, hopping about. I'm not sure about the colours on these. Excuse me, I just made a throaty noise and I don't know if the microphone picked it up. If it did, I'm sorry. I'm trying to make a bit more sense of the armour on his back, because I don't want it too rigid. I've introduced a small tear along the, well, when I say small, it's fatal for him, but it looks fairly small in the picture. The tear along the armour of his back plate. That's what did for him. Well, that and losing his head. That tends to do for a lot of people, losing a head. I'm not sure if you'll find that on a lot of insurance claims, I lost my head, but when people say that, they don't mean quite the same thing. I mean literally, he's lost his head. Got some discarded bits of metal here that you could possibly make out what they used to be. It could have been a greave or some other part. Greave, no, which part? I think that's from the leg, isn't it? A tube of sort of metal that covers part of your shin, I think. I'd have to check that. It's a long time since I've used terminology from suits of armour. I used to have to do a lot of historical books and that kind of thing, so I can't remember what things are called, but I know kind of where they go, ish. I would recommend looking at reference for suits of armour and stuff like that. You get lots of ideas. Historical, I mean. And then add your own twists to it, if that's what you want to do. Which in terms of fancy, obviously a lot of people do, and make fantastic jobs of it. Yes, I've obviously been distracted because the cursor has gone into a coma. I think someone came to the door. I had to go answer it straight away, and I forgot to turn off the recorder. And he's back. Probably try and do like a chainmail thing over his bottom, the guy lying down on the left. And I've turned the lighting off so that I can see what the colours are and see where I've missing bits of where I haven't painted up to edges, and so the forms aren't working as well. But also you can see what colours you're actually working with then. I'm going to add more depth on the this is on the body colour layer. I'm working with the oil paint brush on this. I said I was a watercolourist, but I quite like the oil paints. Are nice and smeary and they're nice for doing body colour. And if you have turned on real colour blending, which is an option in this, you get some interesting sort of surprise colours sometimes where you blend one colour with another, and it can add a bit of variety and a lack of control, as you do get in real paint. Like with watercolour, you get some happy accidents. You'll find that in some of the options in the menus at the top, real colour blending. I think you can also access it through the colour mixer at the bottom, where I've got placed bottom right. You can move the palettes wherever you want in ArtRage and scale them and rotate them and do whatever you want with them up to a point. The funny little square pods, they're not so quite. You can turn them off and on, but you can't really move them much. At the moment, they might introduce that in the future. Who knows? I'm trying to consolidate some of the armour forms a bit. The theory is, if I can get it to look like you can recognise what the shapes were, then you can have bits torn out and strips sort of missing, and it will make more sense. If I just had a mangled pile of metal there, it might not read what has gone on here. As I say in just about every vidcap I do, it's all about visual clues. Visual clues, narrative illustration. That's my bag. Putting a dent in his shoulder there, in the arm on his shoulder. Trying to make the rip a bit more obvious, and tidying up the sword a bit. Obviously I'll have to adjust the blood that's going across that at the moment. I'll have to rub that out a bit later. It should be going underneath it. Any blood on the sword should be splattered from themselves, rather than that they haven't managed to hurt the beastie at all. They were very ineffectual. As you can see, I hop about trying to work out forms as a whole, if possible. He's still going to have most of his armour on, this one on the ground. Well, they're both on the ground, the one face down on the ground. Yeah, it'd look a bit odd if he was floating, wouldn't it? That would imply maybe the aliens were getting involved as well. No, it's not that sort of tale. This is just a straightforward nasty beastie, to use the technical term. See, I've tried to extend the tear a bit across the armour on the shoulder as well. So it was one big rip with the tin opener that went across his back and into his shoulder. When I say into his shoulder, across the armour on his shoulder, I don't think it would have impacted the actual flesh. This is working on the body colour layer again, just introducing a bit of a dark tone to indicate where the light turns away on the armour. Again, the armour's a bit of an odd colour, but I don't mind this at the moment. I may well glaze a colour or some colours on a watercolour layer over this. Because the great thing about digital is you can combine oils and watercolours together, or I may glaze with thinned down oil, and that would work as well. The thing I like about the watercolour tool in this is that each time you do a stroke, it adds to it. I mean, if you lift the stylus off and repeat strokes in one point, it gradually gets darker and darker in an additive way. With the other media, you will just reach a saturation point, and that's it. There's a sort of level that it gets to, and then it stops. It's not additive in the same way. Try it out and you'll see what I mean. Yep. Just pulling back so I can see the whole thing, and turning the shadow and lighting layers back on so that I can have a proper look at it. And pause and look. Right, we've jumped a bit forward. I've done a bit more work on the figures on the ground, but you may also notice that the whole scene is a bit darker. What I've done is actually I have duplicated the lighting layer to make it more dramatic, darker, because I think that suits the scene more. I will show you how I did that. That's in the layers palette, popping up now. That's you can see the duplicated layer there, and using the icon at the bottom right corner on the layer palette, gets that pop-up menu, and then you just click on duplicate layer, and then I worked into that some more, or started working into it with a white chalk just to pick out more highlights. And back to a bit of action of me really doing that. Obviously speed it up again, just so you don't actually go into a coma. You can see it very quickly starts to pop the form if you add little highlights here and there. This is working on the two lighting layers. If you combine the two, you can get nice subtle effects. You can always collapse them together later if you want to. I like splitting the lighting between two things like this, because it affords you the opportunity for more subtlety and more control, and then you can also adjust their opacity individually to play with it, just to get the balance how you want it later on. Meanwhile, I'm still dithering away on the various bits of armour, trying to make it look more like metal. It'll need a lot more crisping up to make the edges look jagged. I'll have to go in and put highlights over the top at the very end to pick things out, and probably pick out a few lines here and there as well. This is fairly crudely done. This is speeded up 5 times, as I said. So I didn't spend awfully long on this particular part, but it's no way finished. This is just kind of to show you how I will go about building it up. And the big split down the front of this poor character here. As said before, I'm not going to go into the detail of showing lots of intestines and stuff like that. Just the hint of dark blood colour there in shadow should be enough to make you think of all sorts of horrible things. Implied is often more horrible than real, because your imagination can do marvellous things. It's always worse in your imagination than it really is. Sorry, that was a bit of a pause. Had to go and let the dog out. Picking out edges. Sometimes I use, for the finer details, I will use the pencil tool. You're not confined to just using the chalk. I just like the chalk because it at the same time as altering the tone, it imbues a bit of texture, because I said it interacts with the paper texture that I've picked, which I think is a watercolour paper. Working at various areas to try and balance it out. What I like is to pick out that little glints here and there to hint at things, but I will also in a minute be showing how I also use rim lighting to round the form. That will be putting a highlight on the other side, just along the edge. It's an old illustration trick. Helps in the printing, gives you nice crisp edges that will print nicely. There you are, you see that's just the JPEG, saved JPEG of it, with a little bit more work on it, and now it's got the highlights. If you look along the arm of the beast, there's some highlights picking out the edge there. And then if we work back into the lighting planes to zing it up a bit like I just indicated there, you can make it pop quite a bit more, and I've added a bit more texture to the ground plane so that makes a bit more sense. Filled in the shapes of the guys behind with the spears. Obviously need more work on them, but they make more sense now, they're more solid. Beefed up the edges on the torn armour at the bottom a bit more as well, so that works better. They get to a point now where I'm fed up with working on lots of layers, so I merge them down into one, because it's got to a point where I want to fettle and fiddle, and I don't need to be diving around along lots of layers. I'll just put it right with a couple more over the top, and then fettle a bit more until I end up with this. Probably didn't even see the transition. That's where I stopped, because I've run out of time really. Hopefully it'll give you some pointers to playing with torn metal effects. Just make it fit within the lighting and that for your scene, and make it look like other metal. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it, hope you have fun, go have a go, and then show us what you've done online in the Imagine Effects forum. See you next time, bye!